and I've been doing that that's where I work for people for, and I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And I was a family advocate before that at Lewis Clark Early Childhood Program.
So who do you work for?
New Horizons.
Okay.
And I am Constance Vance. I am a developmental specialist for Opportunities Unlimited. I work with adults with developmental disabilities, and I've been doing that for almost 30 years.
Mark Havens, I'm the director at Interlink, and I've been doing that for 4 years.
He's my boss, so he knows about it.
Yeah, we don't need to.
Director at Addis Home Care here in Lewiston.
Okay.
We provide assistance to the elderly and disabled.
Mike Payne, and I'm a retired architect, but I'm not doing anything productive right now.
It's actually not true.
Except sitting at this table.
We're on lots of boards.
Yeah, I'll try to donate money.
All right, so do we have any citizen comments? You have any comments?
Well, I appreciate all the work that DAC does. I know you're a very active group, and I think well-informed. I think you know your stuff, which is helpful. I just want to come today and try to take advantage of the meeting and sit here for a few minutes, listen in and show you my support. But I'm gonna exit early to get ready for another meeting.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Well, I know, earlier you said you wanted a quiet place to eat your sandwich, so I wasn't sure if you were here for us or for your
I
sandwich.
knew this was going on here. I brought my lunch to the meeting.
Okay.
We're pretty quiet.
Yeah.
You used to do that, Mark, bring your lunch to the meeting?
Yeah. So I got an email from someone who viewed us and said it's not very attractive.
Oh.
Most people eat when the
I remember you telling me
when the
that.
camera zooms in on you, and I go, didn't know it was doing
Just don't chew with your mouth open.
that.
Talk with your mouth full.
Yeah.
All right, so we have Commissioner Havens here to discuss the aging of the valley.
Thank you. For the last year and a half, Interlink, my organization has been collecting and digesting census data. The data comes from the U.S. Census Bureau about here in the valley, specifically Nez Perce and Asotin County, so it's not specific to Lewiston. And I was asked to share some of that data. We hold quarterly meetings. The next one is August 2nd. These are 3-hour meetings because they're audience participation planning meetings. I was going to say, if you've been to any of them before, you've seen some of this information. That was mainly for Eric's benefit, who's not here because Eric has attended. The mayor attended one of the meetings last year. We have new data at every meeting, and none of what I'm sharing here today is data to be revealed at the August 2nd meeting. This is all from prior meetings. Let's start with the population pyramid, and Jessica, if you can be the one to hand the handouts over to the mayor. I appreciate that. Now, I'm handing you out, because I couldn't figure out how to put it, that's for Judy, on front and back page. The population pyramid's first for Asotin County, and then next for Nez Perce County, because we do know we're all one community. And I think that these pyramids might display that even better than some other data, which we'll get to. And at the meetings, I mean, this, even if I take up much of the hour, it's still a very abbreviated version of what we've been doing since April of last year. At other meetings, we compared these to the state of Washington and Idaho's population pyramid and the United States. The United States population pyramid, since the last census as a whole, is kind of a silo. It's not really a pyramid for most of human history. It's an actual pyramid, lots of young people and very few older people. But most developed nations are now become a silo, if not even top-heavy, like Japan. A lot of old people, fewer young people. US is basically a silo. Washington and Oregon are still actual pyramids. They're among the youngest states in the United States. And then we have the peculiarities here of Asotin and Nez Perce counties. Anyone want to comment, starting with Asotin? Any comments there? By the way, this includes gender, but gender's a whole different discussion. Any comments about Asotin County? Do I have to point out the obvious?
There are a lot of people, 60 to 64.
Yes.
A lot of boomers.
What we call the sombrero pyramid there is like what's going on there in that 5-year age bracket? Did a whole bunch of people get born? Our best interpretation of that, and somebody can spend a lot of time and a lot of money to investigate it, and I'm pretty sure they will find out that what that bubble represents are Idaho people, Lewiston people retiring and moving across the river where there is no state income tax. I think, something that people have always suspected, I think this displays it in a very obvious format. And of course, the challenge, I may say this several times today, the challenge is the fact that the valley is one community, but it lays in 2 states, and it's hard to get state officials to understand that. People in Asotin County, use our doctors and fill up our hospitals and use our social services and to some extent vice versa, but I think, and with all due respect, I think the comprehensive plan that's under review for the city of Lewiston has to take into account to some degree what we might call the suburbs. Clarkson doesn't like it when I say that. The suburbs is the outlying areas where people outside the city limits do use our services. Certainly the Metropolitan Planning Organization has to take that into account when it comes to traffic and transportation. So you have the sombrero pyramid. Now, Nez Perce County has a singularly odd feature. Any comments about it, or?
There's a lot of females at 85 and older.
Yeah, what's going on at the top, what we call the jug handle effect. Our best interpretation of that, with a little bit less certainty, is when you get into the highest years, and perhaps you need care facilities, the vast majority of the care facilities are on the Lewiston side of the river. There's really only 2 comprehensive skilled nursing facilities over in Asotin County, but there's 7, at least 7 large ones in Lewiston, and so we suspect that a certain amount of the population ends up having to move back to Lewiston, either for the care facilities or moving in with their children. The fact that there's more women than men is women live longer than men. So, there you go. You can look at the other gender breakdowns and wonder what's going on there, but that one is certainly distinctive. So, I start with those. The valley is old and getting older. That's our mantra when we start our meetings. I'm going to hand out another graph, because people listening to people talking or reading a lot of words on a page is never very popular. This graph was only produced and handed out at the last summit meeting in May 2nd, I believe. And it's what we call students versus seniors. And yes, of course, they have no connection to each other, unless, of course, you work for a school district. And we did it after the Asotin County, the Clarkston School District's failure of their high school bond election. I expected to see what that chart presents, although not so dramatically. And I knew that student enrollment had been declining, and of course we demonstrated that senior population numbers have been increasing, but I wanted to chart the 2 against each other. So this is a 30-year period of time, 1990 to 2020. In 1990, I worked for the Lewiston School District, and I did not know that there were more students than there were senior citizens. That students outnumbered senior citizens by, I have 11.4%. There were 950 more students than senior citizens. And now, 30 years later, senior citizens outnumber students. By the way, that we got the student enrollment data from both states' departments of education. It includes all 5 public school districts in the 2 counties. It includes private schools, charter schools, and home schools to the extent that the state is aware of them. So roughly speaking, children between the ages of 5 and 18. Now there are 56% more senior citizens than students, or in sheer numbers, 4,808. And that is as of 2020. I keep quoting 2020 figures because that's the most, that's the census data. Census.gov website, they do make projections for 2021 and 2022. I just don't want to start changing all of our graphs. So you see which direction both of those have gone to in. And, if anyone was paying attention in 2010, I don't know about 2000, but in 2010, what was happening should have been apparent to anyone in the Valley who was paying attention. You see that the graph for senior citizen tilts upward even steeper at that point after 2010. Again, shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The oldest of the baby boomers who were born in 1946 turned 65 in 2011. And so that's when the retirees started in even larger numbers than there has been. Now this presumes, of course, we're essentially talking about people who were born here, have been living here. It's not taking into account the Valley being discovered as a retirement mecca and people moving in here. It's a little bit more of a slippery number to pin down. But the fact remains, they are moving in and having an impact in a variety of ways. Now, I didn't copy a scary chart, which my assistant only put together yesterday, or the day before. We're projecting a growth of senior citizens by 8,000, a net of 8,000, and on a later page here, I'll show you how we derive that, in the next 20 years, by 2040. So that we're projecting by 2040 the number of people in the Valley over age 65 will be around 21,000 people. And
What was that?
21,000 people. And so he plotted that on the chart. He just told the computer, let's go out to 2040 and let the computer calculate averages for student enrollment continuing to slightly decline, and senior citizen to increase to that number. And, it creates a really shocking, you can just imagine it yourself, a really shocking gap between the two. Now, there's no connection between the two, I guess, unless you're talking about school elections, but it really dramatically juxtaposes the two. Now, percentages, which I guess that could be the next handout. This is in draft form and only a portion of a report that is being drafted for community leaders. And it's only, it was handed out at the May meeting, and I've only included a few of the pages. It's going to be in a question and answer format. So question number 1, just how old are we? And I'm not going to read the narrative to you. I'm just going to call your attention to the tables. So the tables below show Stoughton and Nez Perce County plus combined, the 2020 total population, the numbers of those residents over age 65, which matches over here. I don't know why it doesn't exactly match. Apparently the Census Bureau is slightly adjusting their numbers, 13,290, and this chart shows 13,372. And the percent of that population that is over age 65, as you see here. Now, it averages between the two counties 20.1%, and that's all population. As later on somewhere here, I reference, I like to remove children, people under age 20. They don't vote, they're not major consumers, they don't own property. So when you remove that cohort from the calculation, the number of people over age 65 as a percentage of the adult population in 2020 is more like 26%. Or if you want to include children, it's 20.1%. Both of these are several percentage points higher than the nation as a whole. Now, I want to share a statistic we just calculated a few weeks ago that I will share in August. If the community wanted to hold constant that percentage with the projection of the number of people, retirees who will be in the valley in 2040, if you wanted to hold that 20% constant, simple math would calculate that the population of the valley by 2040 would have to be 106,000 people to hold that percentage constant. It doesn't change the fact that there'd be 21,000 retirees, including myself, hopefully. But you would have to have 106,000 people in the valley, which is not what's being projected. That would be an increase of 40,000 people above where we were in 2020. Or, again, simple math, an increase of 2,000 people per year, year upon year, every year, for 20 years. Well, we don't have the housing for that. We don't have the infrastructure for that. Nobody's projecting a growth of 2,000 a year for every year. Don't have enough hospital beds, nobody's projecting that kind of growth. So, if you want to be optimistic and do that, that's fine, but our point is the aging of the valley, both in sheer numbers and as a percent of the population, is inevitable. You'd either have to have a pandemic far beyond COVID to kill off a lot of these retirees, or they'd have to move away. Because for the people who commented and said, well, we need to recruit more young families to the valley, we need to grow our way out of this. Are you going to grow the valley to 106,000 people by 2040? And some of those people will probably be retirees, moving in. But are you really going to attract or have a higher birth rate, people giving birth, to grow our way out of the aging of the valley? And I would suggest not. So if you turn the page to question number 2, well, how is this aging different than in the past? And down at the bottom, the chart shows the median age, which is not an average age, it's the number at which half the population is above and half is below. Each decade from 2000 to 2020, and you see that has grown for both counties at a rate faster than the rest of the country. And question number 3, isn't the whole country aging? How does this compare to what's happening everywhere else? Well, if you look at the chart at the bottom of that page, start at the bottom where the state of Idaho and Washington are, 36.6 and 37.8 as their median ages, and the valley being higher than that, as well as percent of the population of the states. Idaho about 15.5%, Washington about 16% over age 65, and the valley being higher than that. In fact, when we got creative and decided to look up the numbers for the state of Florida, we discovered that the valley's numbers already pretty much match Florida. Now, in 2020, not years from now. Which is why the Tribune, in their article on this project we're doing back in January, titled the front page article, "The Florida of the Pacific Northwest." If you turn over to the next page, we took those numbers, or at least the median age numbers, to compare them to other population centers in Washington or Idaho that we're kind of familiar with. And I didn't go as far as Seattle and Portland. In fact, they tend to be quite young. But in descending order, with Lewiston County, state of Florida, and Nez Perce County at the top, Kootenai County, where Coeur d'Alene is the only county that really comes close to what's happening. And I've talked to some people up there; they're aware of it. Retirees moving to Coeur d'Alene. You have Spokane County and of course the state of Washington. You have Walla Walla, Ada County where Boise is, and of course our other counties in the Quad Cities, Layton, Whitman counties being so dramatically younger than we are because of the students.
The universities.
Yeah, the students up there. And in fact, as daunting as it sounds, we went ahead and looked up every metropolitan area in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, which basically is every population center over 50,000 people. And we could find none that are as old as the Valley. And so that statement at the bottom of that page in bold, the Lewis-Clark Valley is the oldest population center over 50,000 people in the entire Pacific Northwest. Now, we've had some people, approach us and talk about, oh, wow, Orfino, Grangeville is aging, rural counties, communities are aging or losing population. And that's totally true. It's just not our job to solve that problem. It's not even our job to research that problem. Yes, the aging of rural areas is daunting, and it has other reasons than a metropolitan area. That's a problem for other people to tackle and solve. But in terms of population centers of over 50,000 people, we're Florida, we're Palm Springs, we're Lake Havasu City for the Pacific Northwest. Now, a big question, number 5, will this trend continue? What can we foresee? The 2 charts you see there at the bottom of that page and the top of the back page shows the census numbers for the cohort immediately behind the cohort we're talking about. So you've got the cohort in 5-year intervals for current seniors age 65 and above, that's on the right-hand side. And you compare it to ages 45 to 64 in Nez Perce County, and on the back side, Asotin County. And you see that they are larger. They are larger numbers. Well, if you read all of the text that's written here, we're projecting that most of them will retire in the valley and not move away. Data from different sources, including Avista economists, say that, yeah, by about your early to mid-40s, people kind of are settled, and vast majority of people do not move away when they retire. The vast majority of people older than age 45 tend to stay where they are. Avista economists tell us the #1 house buying cohort since about 2015, 2016 is ages 51 to 70. And they said that even took them by surprise. But that probably represents, in the valley here, that's throughout their service area, but that represents in the valley here a lot of people moving in. A lot of people moving in to the valley who are older, retirees. They're selling their homes at great markup costs on the coast, Seattle, Portland, California. Moving here and paying cash for houses, having an effect on the real estate market of making it harder for younger families to negotiate housing prices and get mortgages. And so that is happening, especially, probably a little more so in Asotin County than Nez Perce County. So we don't see that trend tapering off anytime soon. Basically because the valley has 5 elements that retirees look for. Relatively lower cost of living, beautiful weather, low crime rate, healthcare services readily available, and recreational activities. I was explaining this, oh my gosh, I go to so many meetings. I was talking, oh I know, it was representatives from the Northwest Justice Project out of Walla Walla, that's Washington's version of legal aid. And they did a workshop a couple weeks ago on senior scams, scamming seniors. And I was explaining this to them, and one of them said, oh yeah, my parents live in Great Falls, they're getting ready to retire. These were younger lawyers. They're getting ready to retire, they don't want to deal with the Montana winters. They've researched the entire Pacific Northwest, and #1 on their list is the Lewis-Clark Valley that they're looking to move to, for all the reasons you just said. And I said, all right, well, that's anecdotal, but nice to know that somebody from Great Falls is looking at us. And you look at the, the back
Sorry.
page. What, are you from there?
No, my mom moved from Seattle a couple years ago, and now my dad and my stepmom are moving from Central Washington.
Her parents are
To
contributing to the.
Clarkston,
Yeah, there you
so
go.
they're part of the statistic.
There you go. We have, we're gonna have some new data at the August 1st meeting, which shows a little bit more of the migration. But I'm just not sure about Asotin County getting all these move-ins, and the move-ins are a lot from just across the river, and I'm not sure how relevant that is, other than taking into account, we are one big community. We just had a conversation this week about, which city could survive on its own if the other city disappeared. Obviously, we're assuming Lewiston, if you wanted to live in Lewiston and never cross that river, you probably could, because Walmart and Costco are probably the biggest draws. But if Lewiston didn't exist, Asotin County would have some challenges, precisely because the people over there need to use our clinics, our healthcare facilities, our hospitals. They can't even give birth in their hospital in Tri-State, and nursing homes, home healthcare agencies, just so many services, which is why it is really not inaccurate to refer to them as a suburb. But, it is what it is, and we all know people in the valley take advantage of the different state laws, such as sales tax and no income tax, when deciding which side of the river to live on, but that's really all it is, a river. So what does this mean, really? I'm gonna hand out that anyone could create their own chart here that we created several months ago, called The Age of More. What can we expect? We shouldn't assume that being an aging valley is all negative. So there's a lot of things on this list that are positive or neutral. I just tried to mix them up. More retirees with time and money, with fewer, no children, more elders. That's really the big one. More elders using the internet. That's the one that we can really predict and project with a great deal of accuracy. The majority of people over age 75 don't use computers, don't use the internet, don't have an internet connection, don't own a computer. Whereas the majority younger than that do. Or draw the number wherever you want, 72, 70, whatever. But the fact is, you talk to people in their 60s. Do you use the internet? Sure. Do any of us know anybody in their 60s who don't use a computer? And then you ask the question, do you foresee a time in your life where you will give up using the computer like you might give up driving a car? And everybody says, no, my smartphone's gonna be buried with me in the casket, or whatever. No, they won't give it up. So with time, more and more elders will be using the internet, and that's probably a positive effect. There'll be more telehealth meetings, meeting with your doctor across town or across the country, over the computer. A lot of usages no longer, that currently really can't be done. And you all know this from the reservoir flood. The mayor knows this, about senior citizens not hearing about it when all of the publicity was sent out via social media and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, seniors don't use social media, they're not hearing about the boil water order, and so that's why we jumped in and made 100 phone calls to notify people about that. That's gonna go away. And you see there'll be more veterans, there'll be more elders no longer driving, and since that's one of our major services, that has Interlink and our board in a panic, is how do we respond to this growing number if there are going to be quite likely thousands of more people not driving? Well, yeah, but more of them will have time on their hands, so hopefully we can recruit more of them as volunteers. You can read the rest on your own, and you could probably add several dozen to this list. That, as I've told different groups, whatever you're dealing with now regarding senior citizens, there'll just be more of it. There'll just be more of it. And there will be a higher percentage of the population, so how do we provide the services that senior services they need, and how do we pay for it? Senior citizens do have, certainly the ones in the valley, the three things that are really hot commodities for any community: time, money, and expertise. Or call it experience, call it wisdom, whatever you want. COVID simply accelerated the retirement age. It would have happened anyway, when baby boomers retired. Would have happened anyway. But because of COVID, lots of people nationwide retired early. They didn't want to deal with working from home. They didn't want to deal with the issues of the workplace. They looked at their retirement funds, investment portfolio, the value of their house, and say, you know what? I was gonna work till 65, I can retire at 61, or 59, or whatever. And that created overnight the labor force shortage that the Census Bureau and the Department of Labor projected for later this decade, but now it happened early in the decade. And what do we do? I mean, what do we do about keeping seniors in the workforce, or keeping them productive members of society? Well, quite frankly, that kind of responsive reaction to this report about how do we keep seniors in the workforce, or how do we address these growing needs, we're going to have to leave to other people or other groups. Since our October meeting last fall, when one of the discussion committees came up with, sort of shined a bright light on the situation, we've pivoted the work of the quarterly meetings. At that table, which was the health table, representing a lot of health-oriented groups, home health agencies and hospice agencies and others. We had tables on transportation and tables on housing, which is a big intractable problem. But the health table said, we're not gonna be able to grow our way out of this. We can't find enough workers now. And as this increases, we're never going to find enough workers for home health and nursing homes, care facilities and hospitals. Even though we have 2 nursing schools here in the valley, that's a whole other subject, we're not gonna be able to keep up. And therefore, instead of just whining about it, that table said, yeah, the goal has to shift. The goal in this valley, the target in this valley has to shift to keeping as many seniors as possible, as healthy as possible, as long as possible, so they do not need to avail themselves prematurely to healthcare services. Because if they do, and if they do at the level that they currently do, they're going to crash the healthcare infrastructure in our valley. Because we can't grow our way out of it, we can't attract enough workers, and if the demand that this kind of chart presupposes were to continue, then you younger people, you're not gonna find a hospital bed when you need one, or you're not gonna find a home health agency to serve your aging parents when you need one, if they need home health services at age 74 instead of age 84 or something. So I've been talking a lot here. Do you, working right on the front line of all of this, do you have anything to say or comment about it, or disagree with it?
I've seen almost exactly what you've seen anecdotally, I just have not seen numbers to back that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been alarming, because I've been watching that happen for some time, about 10 years or so in the valley.
It has been.
And I would, the only critique I would have is that I do actually believe those lines are related, because school-age children come from homes of working families, for the most part, that are gonna be a tax base that's gonna support such a large population of elderly down the road. But this was very valuable information, thank you.
We firmly believe that there's absolutely we can't think of any aspect of human society in the valley that will be unaffected by this shift. And so far, by the way, we haven't found a peer metropolitan area in the whole country that has our statistics. That doesn't mean we're the oldest one by far. It does not mean we're the oldest. Retirement communities like Palm Springs or Sun City, Arizona, you know, their median ages are way up in the upper 50s. But we've sort of scouted around trying to find a community 50,000 and above, a metropolitan area, that their numbers kind of match our numbers and they're growing at about the same rate. And we haven't found any. We're still looking for those peer community. And like I said, it's a little, I mean, we don't have a lot of time. We have work to do at Interlink, but that's why we need an academic research partner that we haven't found yet. But I'd like to find peer communities dealing with these same issues. And if we can't, then we will look toward even older communities, communities that have been retirement meccas for years and decades, and ask, you know, how do you deal with this? I'm familiar with some of these places because I've been to some of them. Lake Havasu is rather unique. There are people here in the valley who own land there, partly because it gets all this winter population of snowbirds. And then they all go away in the summer when it's 120 degrees. And they also fill a lot of their service roles with non-American migrants from Mexico. Fill a lot of the service roles that we don't have here. In fact, you know, on that subject, one reason Idaho and Washington both, in general as a state and many separate counties, have younger age populations than we do is precisely because of immigrant families. Immigrant families moving into southern Idaho and central Washington, working in agricultural or other fields, and they tend to be younger and they tend to have larger families. And as we all know, we don't have that here in north central Idaho. We do not have that phenomenon going on. If we did, that would bring our numbers down. But we don't, and nobody seems to want to encourage that. So anyway, as I was saying, since the October meeting, the focus of the meetings, these are quarterly. I mean, maybe they should be monthly, but you know, taking 3 hours out of your day to meet with your peers to discuss these things and brainstorm, that in itself is a commitment. But at the February and May meetings, we've been focusing on health, and partly at the October meeting. Okay, how do we achieve that goal of keeping senior citizens healthy? And we started with the 6 pillars of health, and then suddenly, you may be familiar with this, the City of Lewiston's Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, because it's being funded with a grant from the Blue Cross Foundation, and they're insisting that the new comprehensive plan have a component on health. How is the city going to keep, I mean, I was just like, oh my God, you're on the same wavelength we are, we're just a year ahead of you. How are you gonna keep your citizens healthy through the comprehensive plan? Well, the consulting company is using 7 pillars of health, so we adopted the 7th one, but the elements of health being physical, mental, social, spiritual, intellectual, and what we call financial, what they call housing and finance, healthy. And then the 7th one was environmental, that we had not thought of, but then we added it to our agenda in May, environmental health. Which the 2 biggest ones here in the valley, quite frankly, would be the heat waves in the summer and forest fire smoke descending in the valley, and the effects of those 2 things on health. But that's what we're working on. That's what we'll continue to work on at the August meeting. We envision 2 reports going to the city councils and county commissioners and other leaders in the valley, ultimately before the end of the year. The report that is the data report that we're calling the silver report, that is the data on the aging of the valley. And the second report, which we're calling the gold report, which is health initiatives around those pillars of health. What needs to happen in partnership with public government, nonprofit, and for-profit businesses to promote senior health. there's some of it going on now, but it's gonna have to be dramatically ramped up to address this, so that we could become like Loma Linda, California. Loma Linda is one of those proverbial blue zones where people live at a much longer and healthier life than most other places, if you're familiar with that book about blue zones. Now, that's partly because they have a huge population of Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarians, and that keeps them all healthy to some degree. Is she talking to somebody?
I don't know, but it looked like she was about to crawl on the ground.
Hopefully she was talking to someone. You had a question, Mike?
Yeah, you mentioned how you would get the word out to counties and cities. Well, was there some reason you did not mention states with the legislatures?
Well, I've had a personal conversation, actually two, with Kathy McMorris Rogers, actually on the other side, and she's very interested, especially now that she's chair of the House Committee on Commerce and Industry. And they're working on a white paper on the aging of America. I've talked to local representative Lori McCann, who's very, very interested in this subject. But another one of my mantras at the beginning of meetings is saying, if you expect solutions to come from Boise and Olympia, think again. I mean, I don't think we should give up on the subject, but
Yeah.
we're in a really bad demographic conundrum, and I'm not the only one who can say this. I first heard about this from Shannon Grove when she was at the MPO, and Suzanne Senior at Valley Transit, or Lewiston Transit, that while our population in Lewiston is growing, it's growing at a slower rate than the rest of the state, much slower rate than the rest of Idaho is growing. Therefore, if the pie remains fixed, constant, we will get, Shannon said this for the MPO, Susanna said this, we'll actually get less money from the state, despite the fact that we're growing and our needs are growing. But the other parts of the state are growing faster than we are, and they have different needs.
They're growing in different demographic
And they have
groups.
growing, different needs. And so they will always claim a bigger piece of the pie. Now, Washington's a little different. Washington recognizes the issue of the senior population. They're especially concerned about growing Alzheimer's cases. And so Washington takes federal money designated for aging and adds state money to it. Idaho doesn't add a dime to federal money. The monies you hear given out for senior services, senior grants, is 100% federal money with no state augmentation. And so a group like Interlink that provides senior transportation, our reimbursement from the state per ride that we give keeps going up and up and up in Washington for Stoughton County residents, and is flat here in Idaho to the point now that we get reimbursed more than twice as much money per ride in Stoughton County than we do here. We're drastically losing money, which may lead to, well, first of all, we may come before the city council and ask for money, but it may lead to us having to impose a fee on Lewiston residents who want to ride with us because we're losing money. And we barely break even over on the other side of the river with them paying more than twice as much. So, I'll go in front of any committee, any state committee, talk to any legislature who might listen on this subject. Partly because, as I think Matt would agree, this isn't really a slow burn anymore. It might have been a decade and a half ago, but this is, every year, it's dramatically climbing and getting more and more. And, who am I? I'm just this tiny little 4-person nonprofit. These people have a trade association. I went to the legislative tour dinner that the governor was at, and you guys are organized. And they have a trade association of home health care agencies that are begging the state. We can't find enough workers, we can't pay them enough to attract them. you know, to work here and the population's aging and they have a lobbyist. I believe you have a lobbyist in Boise. And as far as I can tell, you're not making a lot of headway.
Some,
Some,
not nearly enough.
not enough. Well, my training, we're running out of time. My training in public relations will tell you that PR theory, there's 3 obstacles to changing behavior. The first one is people saying, this is not a problem. Just absolute denialism. And we've run into that. And we just say, well, do your own research.
Yeah.
You know, ours comes from the Census Bureau. It's all online. Well, that's not been my experience. Well, your experience doesn't matter. Do your own research. That is not a problem. Then, second obstacle is, okay, it's a problem, but it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me personally.
Mhm.
And that's where we have to say, well, it may affect your aging parents, or you may not get a hospital bed when you need one because it's all filled up with older people, or your child's not getting a new high school because older people are voting against it. It will affect everyone in every aspect of life, but not necessarily in a bad way if we can harness the retirees and all the resources that they bring to the table. And that's the third one, that's the third obstacle. Okay, it is a problem and it will affect me, but there's nothing I can do about it. And that's just people who want to be passive and complain. We have enough complainers. Yes, we're sounding the alarm in 2023, starting in 2022, about this because now is the time to plan for 2040. We tell people who attend our meetings, which are predominantly not senior citizens. They are people, working people in the industry between ages 45 and 64, and we say, use your own experiences with this. What do you want now for your aging parents if they live in the valley? And what do you want 20 years from now when you're a retiree? What do you want in the valley that doesn't currently exist? Because the time to start planning for that is now. Nothing seems to change very fast in the valley. So the time to start planning ahead for the kind of community we want in 2040, when 1 out of 3 adults will be retirees. 1 out of 3, when we add 8,000 more people to this, will be retirees.
I would think that there's another obstacle here, which is that trying to get the word out through our fading media outlets. I mean, they're going away. I mean, television news, the newspapers, you know, they're disappearing before our eyes. How are we gonna get the word out? You know, how are you gonna get the word out without those?
Yes, you hit on a really good point there, because a lot of people think that only old people subscribe to the newspaper, the Lewiston Tribune. And as a matter of fact, the number of older people who don't subscribe to the Tribune is shocking. For whatever reason, they can't afford it, they don't like it, whatever reason. So, but you're talking about a different topic. You're talking about, with all these senior citizens, how do you get the word out to them about resources or how to stay healthy and things like that?
To ring the alarm bell.
In terms of this data, this is community leaders, this is business leaders, civic leaders. I've already presented in front of the Lewiston City Council, but that was last June of last year. That's a much smaller number. Community leaders, business leaders, you can get through the Chamber of Commerce if they're members, about planning. But yeah, when you start a new program, or even existing programs, how do you get it out to the people that you want to take advantage of? And one thing we have found out from these meetings is somebody raising their hand and saying, we really need this in the valley, and someone else saying, we already have that. That already exists. Do you not know about this? And that has happened more times than I can count along the lines of what you're talking about, so that resources get matched with the people who could help or take advantage of it. Well, Moscow and Pullman seem to function without a lot of media services informally, and a lot of that though is social media.
Yeah, they're a younger population, that would
Yeah.
naturally be on those,
Exactly.
in those spaces.
But, you know, that is absolutely a discussion, you know, to be had, ongoing, and at a
Yeah.
certain point, there's always mass mail.
Yeah.
It's expensive to every household.
You know, if there's anything that can be done to bolster the local media sources, you know.
Problem there is, not to write them off, but they are private enterprises.
Yeah.
They are private for-profit enterprises, they're not nonprofits and not governmental entities. But thank you for pointing that out, because that's a really big problem. But I want to start talking, and you're all invited to do so too, talking to older people and simply asking, where do you get your news? Where do you get your news about what's going on and what's available? You know, how do you learn? And some of them have never really thought about that, but they expect to hear it word of mouth. And that's a little hard if you're homebound.
Well, nearly everybody's homebound at this point. We don't have a social aspect really as a, I don't know, I've just been watching, and the last 3 years have been really, they've taken a toll on our social interactions as a society, I think.
It has.
I mean, nearly everybody attended church just 15, 20 years ago. That was a primary place of interacting with other human beings. We don't even do that anymore to a large degree. And so I totally understand what you're talking about. We don't have the opportunity to engage in word of mouth.
I mean, I have so much more data than what's here, but the majority of retirees over age 65 do not belong, here in the valley, do not belong to a congregation. That it mirrors the rest of the population. So the idea, say, maybe coming from our southern Idaho brethren, saying, well, let the churches take care of that. Nah, that ain't gonna work. That's not gonna work. And actually, to a large extent, a lot of that, the unchurched, is because they are transplants. They have moved here from elsewhere and have just never gotten affiliated with the church. Well, if that isn't a screaming opportunity for faith communities to do recruitment, I don't know what is, but they're not doing it. And so yeah, there's a lot of societal and demographic things. And don't assume, when I said retirees with money, don't assume that older people are all poor, even though social services agencies like mine and maybe yours deal with low-income people. The figures of senior citizens below the poverty line are as follows. In round figures, for the entire United States, it's about 10%. For the state of Florida, it's 12%. For Asotin County, it's 8%. For Nez Perce County, it's 6%. Our seniors below the poverty line are less than the national average. Most seniors are functioning with
So as long as we can get bodies here to work with them, we should be okay.
Exactly, and how do we do that? And again,
Another problem.
that's outside the purview of our project.
Right.
But other people, yeah, housing issues and other things. But, you know, this is more of a crystal ball than almost anything any of you will look at. The economic development agencies want to say, oh, we're projecting this amount of job growth and this amount of, you know, property growth and all of that. And all of that is somewhat speculative. Yeah, this is pretty certain. And these numbers for the cohort behind the retirees is pretty certain. This is as much of a crystal ball as you're gonna see. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I could have done it in 15 minutes. I had to do it for the United Way yesterday.
Well, I don't know how you put all of that in 15 minutes.
No, I couldn't, no, you get a tiny piece, but when she said, oh, you have most of the meeting, I said, well, then I'll share more. It's daunting, but there's so much opportunity there. I wish I could clone, oh,
Is there a
here's,
senior summit?
this is the poster, yeah, if you wanna take it back,
I was gonna say,
to remind you,
This is for the August 1st.
August 2nd,
August
2 to
2nd.
5.
And this is where you guys discuss those things?
Yeah. And we'll break you into tables.
and who is coming to this?
Anyone who wants to.
But are you targeting certain organizations?
Our mailing list is over 250 people, and our average attendance is 25. So, you know, we wish more people would come than have been coming, but on the other hand, it's always a good mix of public, private, and nonprofit who get together and discuss issues. And by the way, that's another obstacle. We recognize it's a problem and it affects us, but it ain't my job. It's your job, or it's your job, or it's your job. It's always someone else's job
Yeah.
to deal with. It's not my job. And what we ask people to do is, well, what can you do? What do you or your organization bring to the table that you can do?
I assume this has gone to the newspapers and the television and the,
Not yet, but it will be, yeah.
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 Okay.
Any questions? Because I talked a lot. It's a lot to
I
absorb.
think, well, it was a lot of.
It's a lot to absorb. And if I was a school district, I'd be really concerned about this.
You used to be.
I did used to be, and I think the Lewiston School District got their high school bond
Just in
passed
time.
at just in time, with just the right campaign.
Right.
Clarkston's going to have a different struggle, in my opinion. Thank you. What's next?
We don't have anything on the active agenda. I think minutes are gonna be on next month.
And if you forgot the minutes on the agenda,
But I mean, what,
I was happy just to get it out.
yeah, but I mean, what other topics do we want to hear?
Well, future agenda item topics, if you guys have the minutes from June. They were transportation, I think, agencies from all over being invited to come talk about transportation.
Which I have not tried to reach out to.
Trying to think of what the other ones were. Do you have it there?
Well, something about having the legal department come to
Oh,
talk
yeah,
about
legal-
ADA.
Yeah, legal department come talk about ADA as far as city services, programs, and,
Regarding the transportation, something that we were trying to work around was, and I know we specifically deal with our community, but one of the things that was an issue last week or last month when we were talking about was how do we network the outlying communities to our transportation available here? Because we do have elderly populations in all of these rural communities that still need to access Lewiston and or Sauter County. That was just kind of a refresher of what we were really trying to dial in on, I think.
well, and you had brought up Coast. Is that-
Eric.
Oh, Eric brought up Coast.
Coast is the only regional transportation organization. It might be hard to get someone from Colfax to come down here to speak, but it's not impossible. And I'm not fully familiar with everything they do because it's a shifting landscape. But I will tell you, they transport from city to city, all the way to Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Walla Walla. But they transport more people in the state of Washington, more different kinds of people. Pretty much anybody in the state of Washington could request free transportation from Coast, believe it or not. And Idaho, for all kinds of funding reasons, is far more limited. You'd need to be on Medicaid, and maybe people with disabilities. I don't know how much you all know.
People with disabilities typically do have Medicaid. If they do not, then they cannot access that service.
Coast, yeah.
Or for like ride
For
share.
Medicaid, yeah,
Yeah.
transportation that's
Not
existing in
change,
Lewiston.
but I think the thing that you discussed here in the last hour that was most alarming to me is healthcare. Is there anybody we can invite to talk about healthcare in the valley? You know,
Long-term planning.
well, long-term care, but not only that, but hospital beds and, you know.
Well, let's just say maybe not for the next meeting. If any of you come to the August 2nd meeting, try to make contact with some of those folks. Nobody's doing collaborative planning. Okay, so St. Joe's Hospital, who's always been invited, has never sent a single person to any of these meetings.
How about Tri-State?
Tri-State Hospital sends from 1 to 3 representatives to every meeting, but, you know, they're not planning for the region, they're planning for themselves.
Yeah.
And much of what you've seen them do is earmarked around this, from changing their name
Yeah.
from Tri-State Hospital to Tri-State Health
Yes.
as a focus on wellness and health.
Well, and putting in clinic.
The
here in
clinics, buying the
Lewiston, yeah.
clinics, but again, it's just focused on
Mhm.
their advantage.
Mhm.
The hospice agencies are very much, because hospice utilization in the valley is way below the percentage that Medicare says it should be. And so they're doing planning, but everyone's doing their planning in a silo. Nobody's coordinating, regionally. So, number one, I don't know who you would get to speak on that subject, and number two, they still don't trust each other. They're still not, I don't know. I mean, home healthcare agencies, do you ever get together?
Occasionally.
There's always,
There's always a little bit of a competitive nature
competitiveness
there.
and, what do you call it? Price fixing, monopoly, kind of antitrust issues
Mhm.
that can play into that. But St. Joe's is now a for-profit hospital, Tri-State isn't. You know, actually, there could be one, and that'd be the North Central District Health Department.
Yeah, that's a good
The
idea.
North Central District Health Department, to put that on a list, Carol Morley or someone else.
Ringing the bell.
Mhm.
We
Could
need to
be
we
somebody.
need to be announcing to the community, hey, we need to start
Yeah.
thinking for the future.
The Asotin County Health District has started their every 3-year, what do you call it, healthcare needs assessment. I've already been interviewed about that. That plan will eventually be adopted sometime next year. They'll be holding community meetings over in Clarkston next fall as they collect the data. And this issue is no doubt gonna come up for Asotin County. I think the North Central District Health Department is looking later this year or next year to launch their needs assessment process. And we expect this to be a part of it. But anyway, I do find it exciting, once you get over the initial shock.
Yeah.
I do find it exciting, there's a lot of opportunities for us, and including funding, but a lot of that's from private philanthropies as opposed to government.
You don't have to go through the other stuff, right? Is it-
Staff liaison, you have comments?
I have nothing.
Then I move that we adjourn.
Second?
What is anybody
All in favor?
as opposed?
I don't believe anybody's.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That
Very
was.
informative.